I want pathology to move from the doctor's doctor to truly becoming the patient's doctor. And we're making real progress. Because what often scares patients when they read their pathology report isn't so much the word cancer, it's the silence. This program equips pathologists to break that silence. And honestly, it's one of the things I am most proud of. And the ASCP should be proud as well, because no other major pathology organization, not CAP or USCAP, currently offers a certification workshop for pathology clinics. I truly believe that this work can move the entire field forward in patient care. It turns traditionally hidden specialty into direct, human, visual conversations where patients can finally see their diagnosis. And for many patients, that moment when the invisible becomes visible and the unknown finally makes sense, it's a moment where fear begins to turn into understanding, and understanding begins to turn into trust.
Learn about the newest digital pathology trends in science and industry, meet the most interesting people in the niche, and gain insights relevant to your own projects. Here is where pathology meets computer science. You are listening to the Digital Pathology Podcast with your host, Dr. Aleksandra Zuraw.
Welcome, my trailblazers. My guest today, Michele Mitchell, is a cancer survivor and patient advocate who lived this from the patient side and now works closely with pathologists. Welcome, Michele. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure meeting you and speaking to your listeners. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm so happy to have you. A couple of backstory facts, because you saw your images. You talked to a pathologist at Michigan and looked at your digital slides years after your diagnosis. And that changed how you understood your cancer and your options. And most people still never see their images. A pathologist looks at the tissue, writes a report, then the treating team makes decisions based on the report, and the images stay in the background. And digital pathology doesn't solve everything, but it removes a lot of practical barriers to accessing and sharing slides. And that opens the door to more direct conversation with patients. And this is basically what this episode is going to be circling around, because there's going to be, you have like such a huge story. I suspect it's going to be a long one. But because this is the Digital Pathology Podcast, I want to understand from your perspective, what was the digital pathology piece that helped you, that can help patients? And as you, trailblazer, listen to this, think about your own context, patient, family member, clinician, and what it would look like for you or other people you care for to actually see those images and understand the story they're telling. So, Michele, we start with you. For those who have never met you, you're a patient advocate, but tell the story about who you are and why what you went through is important for others as well.
Well, thank you so much again for the opportunity, Alek. This is truly an honor, and I'm so grateful to be here. As you said, I'm Michele Mitchell. I'm a breast cancer survivor, a caregiver, and a national patient advocate. Everything I do is on a volunteer basis, and I've never accepted a dime for this work because for me, it's a calling, not a profession. I'm also a wife, a stepmother, and proud grandmother of 10 grandchildren. So when I talk about the importance of getting healthcare right, it's very personal on every level. Let me share a little of how I got here because it wasn't a straight line. You know, cancer shows no bias and disregards the challenges one may already face in life. In 2005, I married my husband, Ray, who had 4 children. This was thrilling for me. I had not been a parent before, and I relished the opportunity. But 9 months later, in 2006, I received devastating news from my ultrasound and mammogram results. It said, highly suspicious malignancy, breast cancer. I went home to tell Ray. He suffered his first stroke within a half hour after I told him. A month later, I had to make the devastating decision to take him off life support after multiple strokes, which were all caused by an infected tooth. Just 1 month after his burial, I started my own breast cancer journey at the University of Michigan Comprehensive Cancer Center. So from the very beginning, my experience of cancer has never just been my own. I was a patient and a caregiver simultaneously, and that has never really stopped. In 2013, my stepdaughter from Ray, Tricia, lost her 3.5-year battle with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She had asked me for my help in navigating the University of Michigan health system, and together with her sisters and her mother, we tried desperately to get her well. We even went to MD Anderson, Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis, and Sloan Kettering in New York. But every experimental treatment failed. She died at the tender age of 23. And that loss changed me permanently. Then my parents had open heart surgery just 11 days apart. My dad's lungs never recovered. I was their caregiver too. Dad passed away in 2014. In 2016, my husband Bill had a melanoma recurrence, and he discovered he carries a MITF genetic mutation that predisposes him to both melanoma and renal cancer. My mother's health then began to fail. She had pulmonary hypertension and congestive heart failure. We lost her in 2019. And more recently, I've helped countless friends and extended family members navigate their own cancer journeys: oral cancer, uterine cancer, osteosarcoma, and many more cancers. Each time, I bring everything I've learned about the system, about pathology, about asking the right questions to help them feel less alone and more informed at the moments that matter most. You know, I take my role as a patient and a caregiver in each and every one of these circumstances very seriously. Through all of it, I felt I had a greater purpose behind these seemingly unbearable losses. I was convinced these things did not happen by chance, and my path was made clear. These experiences ignited a passion within me to pursue patient advocacy, not just for myself, but for every person who's ever sat in a waiting room alone, afraid, and without enough information to understand what's going on. I spent 25 years as portfolio manager in the Information Systems Project Management Office at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. So I understood how healthcare works from the inside. I retired in 2009. I had found my own new work. I began volunteering at the Michigan Medicine Cancer Center and then co-chaired the Department of Pathology, Patient and Family Advisory Council for over 9 years. I also volunteer at the American Society for Clinical Pathologists, where I am a patient champion, the Digital Pathology Association Patient and Family Engagement Committee, and locally here, the Michigan Hospital Association Patient Engagement Committee, the Michigan Clinical Trials Consortium, and the MyPathologyReport.ca website, where I'm a patient advisor. In addition, I work with the American Cancer Society Reach to Recovery program, meeting directly with newly diagnosed breast cancer patients. People come to me because I sat in nearly every seat in the healthcare system: patient, caregiver, advocate, and advisor. My lived experience is my expertise. With the advent of personalized medicine, AI, and a more educated patient population, I believe patient advocates are ready to make real change. The era of the passive patient is over, and I will keep using my voice until every patient feels seen, heard, and understood.
What a journey, Michele. This is, I don't even know what to say, because one loss can basically put somebody down and they never get up, never recover. And it's another loss on top of the one that they lived. And you've suffered so many, and you managed to turn it into such a unstoppable force. Before this podcast episode, we were chatting what you are all doing, and it's really a lot. Let's just put it that way. In many organizations, trying to get into more to basically turn this, like, I don't know if I had such a sad intro in any of my podcasts, because it's digital pathology and it's nice technology. But like you say, the patient journey is so underrepresented. That's why it's so important to have patients talk about it, because everybody's going through this journey on their own. And it's not just in healthcare, but healthcare is such a great example because it's actually complex to navigate. But probably it's in every single area of life, marriage, parenting, like everybody does that, but nobody talks about it. Everybody is like smiling, strong, I can do it. And a lot of them are not that smiling inside and cannot do it in the less traumatic areas of life. And not to mention something like, cancer diagnosis, which can basically be like your prelude to death.
Yeah.
So a lot of admiration, respect. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to go back to your personal story, your personal diagnosis. So first question, quick question. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
46.
Okay, 46. I'm 41. My grandma, I think she was 54 when she passed away from breast cancer. So yeah, these are young people getting cancer. What I want to ask you is, you talk about the day that was about 10, 11 years after your diagnosis, when Dr. Jeff Myers at Michigan showed you a digital image of your original tumor slide. So that was already, a decade after. So speaking of cancer, I did have thyroid cancer, and I've been cancer-free for like over 20 years. Other than taking my Synthroid medication, I don't think about it, right? 10 years after being cancer-free, I didn't think about it. But you saw this image 10 years, over a decade after, and it still had impact.
Yes.
So can you take us to that moment when you saw the image on the screen, and what did it explain to you? Like a decade after you being active in that space, taking care, knowing so much, this like moment of seeing.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That moment is one I will never forget. Just a little bit of background for your viewers. In 2006, I had gone through a lumpectomy, 4 rounds of chemotherapy, 6 weeks of radiation, and over 8.5 years of endocrine therapy. So my treatment officially ended in 2015, and I was grateful to be alive. But here's the striking part. I had never seen my pathology report. That just didn't happen in 2006. I had never seen my slides or digital representation of my cancer. I had absolutely no visual connection to what had been happening inside my body. In 2016, as I mentioned earlier, I was co-chairing the Department of Pathology, Patient and Family Advisory Council at Michigan Medicine. And you mentioned 10 years after my diagnosis, I was offered a unique opportunity. I was the first person from our PFAC to volunteer to see my own digital pathology images. And that's when Dr. Jeff Myers, who was the co-chair of the PFAC, guided me through what I saw on the screen. Mm-hmm. So first, Jeff showed me what normal digitized breast tissue looked like. And then he opened up my digitized image of my original breast tumor back in 2006. I was looking at my own cancer, my actual cells for the first time. And what I saw were dense black dots, and those were the nuclei of my cancer cells. Dr. Myers explained that the number and density of those nuclei confirmed that I had had a grade 2 invasive ductal carcinoma, much more aggressive than I had ever imagined. There's only 3 grades. I didn't even know grade was a term. And he told me something that stopped me cold. Those stem-like cells could still be circulating in my body because it was an invasive ductal carcinoma, capable of reactivating. So Jeff took a moment to comfort me when I needed it most. The news was overwhelming and unexpected, but his compassion stayed with me. In a world filled with starched white lab coats, he showed that compassion and clarity still matter, at least to this patient. Most patients don't know this, but the pathologist, not the rendering or ordering physician, makes the diagnosis. They are the first person to truly see your disease. And that moment is not routine. It's life-altering. I met my pathologist, and it changed me forever. It gave me clarity, control, and a mission. Before my pathology clinic, I felt lost and overwhelmed, really. Seeing my diagnosis and having it explained to me, finally, I understood my cancer. And I believe every patient deserves that.
Definitely. I think it's like the power of this lays in how much it impacted you even a decade after basically your treatment was done, right? You knew everything from what you went through, from oncology visits, reports, and this image, these black dots on the slide, they impacted you so much after this diagnosis, because like when you break your hand, and that's a cliche comparison to radiology, I know, right? You go, they take an x-ray, you see it. So of course you saw it. You're not going to be overexerting your hand, even if you feel great, but it's like immediately, it's like incorporated. And in pathology, this is like totally obscured. You mentioned that when you were diagnosed, you didn't even see your report, right? Now patients have the report, they can read it, they can, paste it in ChatGPT or whatever. They can try to figure out what it means and relate to it in some way. I want to ask a practical question, and I'm going to be going back to a decade after it still made such an impact. But the practical question, okay, you've been in treatment, you were trying, to stay healthy. When you saw it, what changed in your life? Other than, okay, there was this moment. Was there something happening after this moment in your life that changed as well?
Absolutely. I mean, that image gave me something no report could ever have done. It was a visceral understanding of what I was dealing with. Before that visit, as you mentioned, I thought I understood my diagnosis. I thought I was told I had a stage 1A breast cancer, and essentially they had gotten it all. It was no big deal. I attended all my medical appointments and did everything my multidisciplinary team told me to do, but nothing prepared me for that moment. So with that diagnosis of a grade 2 tumor, I didn't understand what grade meant in the context of my own body. Mm-hmm. After the consultation, the clarity it became crystal clear for me. I printed a copy of the digitized cancer. I keep it framed on my nightstand. It's a constant daily reminder to live a healthy lifestyle. And the experience, as you mentioned, was truly transformative for me. I lost over 100 pounds. I changed what I ate. There are certain foods that you can eat that are estrogen, of sort of plant-based estrogen. I stay away from those. Mm-hmm. I exercise regularly to keep the weight and the inflammation down on my body. Inflammation is not good for these cancer stem cells that are floating in my body. They could reactivate because of inflammation. Back in 2016, patient-facing digital pathology wasn't a standard. The only software available to me.
It still is not a standard. That is the sad thing, because we have all the means, but it's far from standard. Right.
Back then, they had something called ImageScope, which Dr. Myers and his team had installed on my laptop. And I was trained on how to annotate my own pathology images and learned how to print them. And from that point on, Dr. Myers and I did what we took the show on the road, raising awareness and educating about digital pathology, about the power of giving patients visual access. So this is back in 2016. We took it all around the country. I spoke along with him. He was a visionary in this regard. The experience also reshaped my advocacy. I went from surviving cancer to being on a mission to ensure that every patient could have that same access and clarity. I believe every patient should have access to their digitized representation of their disease and the opportunity to meet with the pathologist who made that diagnosis, to ask questions and truly understand what matters. And Alek, the evidence supports this shift. Multiple peer-reviewed studies highlight the value of pathologists meeting directly with patients. In fact, 85% of patients are interested in pathology-patient consultations. And surprisingly, 86% of pathologists are interested in conducting these. And even more interesting is that 83% of clinicians support it. Mm-hmm. One other study I'll point out is called Clinicians Are From Mars, Pathologists Are From Venus. And what this study showed is that clinicians misunderstood pathology reports about 30% of the time. So the benefits are clear for all parties. For clinicians, there would be greater focus on prognosis and treatment, improved patient adherence to treatment plans, better informed patients, more patient-centered care, more efficient clinic encounters that they would have with the patient, stronger multidisciplinary collaboration, and probably reduce burnout. And for pathologists, it's the opportunity to explain complex diagnoses directly, improve diagnostic accuracy through engagement, eliminating the black box perception of pathology. It elevates the visibility of the and the value of the field. And it gives you an increased professional satisfaction. And multiple touch points could be allowed for patients along their cancer journey. Ultimately, it isn't about technology, as you mentioned. It's about connection, clarity, and giving patients the understanding that they deserve. All the pieces are in place. We just need the will to do it.
Very much. And so a couple of things to highlight. First, like how it influences compliance and adherence to treatment. And this is not the first time I'm hearing this. I had Dr. Lija Joseph on my podcast, and that was something she mentioned as well, that a patient seeing this finally understood her biomarker status, and she knew why she actually needs to take the medication, where I think in her demographics, there was some kind of prejudice about taking specific medicines, right? So she was not really compliant because she didn't understand why she should. And the moment she saw it, it changed how she lived. Like basically what you're telling me, you saw it and you changed how you live. And then the second thing that, I was not really thinking about is, of course, clinicians may misunderstand this. This is like, the other way around, right? Pathologists are not the treating physicians. They may not understand all the treatment regimes. Mm-hmm. The same clinicians are not the diagnosing physicians. So the communication there and basically seeing in conjunction with pathology report is a win-win-win for the whole care team. And by care team, I mean the treating physician, the diagnosing physician, which is going to be the pathologist, and the patient who's part of this team, because without the patient, without being compliant, being willing to undergo this treatment, there's no cure, there's no treatment, right? And what you say, empowering patients and making them part of the care team. I love that this is part of your mission, because this is something people just don't talk about. Like, what are you going to go? First, you have to survive this journey. It's not something you're going to talk to not a close friend over coffee, right? It's kind of still a taboo topic. You may say, okay, yeah, I'm fine now, but you don't want to bring people from the outside into this very tough journey. So having somebody like you who already lived through a big storm, I would call it, and survived it and is willing to talk about it is super powerful. And I'm super happy to have you on the podcast. And you said, you mentioned the compassion of your pathologist, that you didn't feel like it was just diagnosing a sample, that you actually felt like a patient when the pathologist took time to walk you through your slides. And you're totally right. Like, the technology doesn't really matter. It can be a static image. You can make a digital copy of a glass slide, like with your smartphone, with whatever technology you have, if the will is there to do it. The question is, emotionally, how did this change your relationship with your body, your fear of recurrence, and your sense of control to see these actual cells that had once been in you? And you mentioned you did want to print out the image. Tell me a little bit about that as well, because I know some people who didn't want to see the image because they had enough tissue understanding that they were afraid to see more that they kind of bargained for. So there are like two sides of this coin, but you say 85% or over 80% clinicians, pathologists, patients, they want to see the images. It's going to be beneficial for them. So yeah, the impact for you about this feeling of not having just a sample diagnosed, but you being the patient in this whole story.
Yeah, it was profoundly humanizing. In January 2022, the Pathologist magazine published a feature article that I wrote. It was entitled Not Just a Sample. Mm-hmm. And that title captures exactly what I experienced with Dr. Myers. For the first time in my cancer journey, I was not a file number, a case number, or a sample. I was a person, a whole person being seen. On a personal level, that image changed how I think about my weight, my choices, and how I care for my body. And when you actually see what's inside of you, when it has a face, if you will, you make different decisions. And what stayed with me is the sheer size of the enemy I'm still facing. Mm-hmm. And I'm convinced this transformation will have a positive impact on my health moving forward, all because I saw my digitized cancer and the opportunity to walk through it with my pathologist. You know, as far as the fear of reoccurrence, that never really leaves you. It just waits in the background until something brings it back. Mm-hmm. In fact, in December of 2022, I had a real scare that became a cautionary tale about real-time access to your medical information without anyone there to interpret it. If I may just explain, earlier that year, I was experiencing persistent back pain, and I had had a X-ray in June. I have osteoporosis from all the cancer treatment that I went through. And the X-ray said, yeah, your osteoporosis is worse and you have significant scoliosis. And they said that was likely from the radiation. And in July of 2022, my medical oncologist ordered a bone scan, which showed no metastases. And this was all reassuring news, but my pain continued. So mm-hmm. On December 1st of 2022, I had my primary care doctor at Michigan ordered up 2 MRIs of my spine. I expected to see, some additional changes. But the very next day, I read my report in the patient portal, and it said, a bone lesion, 2.3 centimeters, concerning for metastases given underlying malignancy. Imagine my shock when I saw that. It was in my L5 vertebrae. At that point, December 2nd, 2022, nothing else mattered. Not the laundry, not the Christmas preparations. I only had one question. Had my breast cancer returned? And this time in my bones. So 5 days later, I underwent 2 additional tests, an MRI with contrast this time, followed immediately thereafter with a PET scan. So while I'm lying in the room preparing for the PET scan, drinking my cocktail, I began to receive push notifications. And it said the MRI results were already there. There was no one in the room with me. I had my cell phone, and I couldn't resist looking. and I saw in the MRI results metastatic foci and additional bone lesions now in my L1 and L4. And there was no one in the room to explain to me, but I kind of knew what metastatic meant, no contact. So I did what most patients would do in that space. I Googled it. The happy thing to report here is for 17 days, I lived in fear, believing my cancer had returned. Finally, I had a biopsy, which was a very invasive procedure requiring the interventional radiologist to drill through my spine. It was painful, but I needed those answers. And the results said that it was not cancer. Dr. Myers called me the day after. He personally looked at the pathology report on a Saturday morning and called my husband and I and said, it is not cancer, I was so grateful. They were hemangiomas, which are benign and most likely had been there all my life. So, when you have cancer, so much happens to you. Decisions are made, treatments happens, and you feel like a stranger in your own personal care. So seeing my slides and having someone explain it to me feels like you're a participant again. For me, the question became real the moment I saw that digitized image on the screen. I wasn't just a pixel. It brought clarity, understanding, and empowerment. Fear thrives in the dark. When someone turns on the light, literally shows you the image, fear has less power. I won't pretend the fear of reoccurrence went away entirely. It doesn't. But having that knowledge, that clarity about what had been going on in my body and what to watch for gave me something concrete to hold on to. And I think about all the patients who have never get that experience, who go through their entire cancer journey, never truly seeing or understanding what's growing inside them. That is what drives me every single day.
That's powerful. And that is something super important to highlight, because the first thing I get a pushback about when I talk about it on social media, I'm working on this book to describe the process, how patients can get access to their images, right? And I was talking about it on social media. First pushback is, the patients will not understand. The radiology, it's a break, you can show it and they will see and they understand. But so much more expertise is needed to explain a pathology image. On one hand, yes, it's not like such a mainstream image that you're going to see when it comes to medical imaging. On the other hand, like you're mentioning right now, there were foci, metastatic foci in the radiology report. They looked as they looked on the radiology image, but nobody knows how they actually look and what these cells are until a biopsy is taken, until a pathology image out of your tissue is generated. And it may take 15 more minutes to explain, but then it is what it is. There are the cells that are there, like it's definitive. If you need a IHC marker, you do the IHC and you see if the biomarker is there or not. It's no more like guessing. And I don't want to say radiology is guessing, but it's the step before you take the biopsy, because biopsy pathology is the definite diagnosis that the treatment is based on, right? So here's the counter argument. Yes, maybe it takes 15 more minutes to explain, but then once it's explained, it's the real thing, not the suspicion of something that generates fear. So thanks so much for sharing that. And as you said in the intro, you now accompany other patients to Michigan and other centers, and you hit the road with your pathologist to talk about it. You've seen many of the patients view their slides for the first time. Could you share one story that shows how an image-based conversation with a pathologist changed the patient's questions, decisions, made them be more calm or have more peace of mind? Do you have any examples other than your own?
Well, as you mentioned, I have accompanied many patients to appointments at the Cancer Center at Michigan Medicine and elsewhere. But I want to be candid. I haven't personally sat beside a patient while they viewed their digitized slides for the first time. However, I have seen very closely what happens when the opportunity comes too late. Last year, a dear friend of mine, someone who is like a sister to me, was newly diagnosed with breast cancer. She asked me to help her, and of course, I said yes. So like many patients, she saw her pathology report filled with terms and felt overwhelmed, and they were unfamiliar to her. Words like great and invasive carried weight but not clarity. So we did what we could at the time. I wasn't able to get her a meeting with her pathologist initially. We did what many patients did, like you mentioned. We turned to ChatGPT to try to make sense of her particular pathology report. And together we translated the report into what we thought was plain English, and we built a long list of questions for her pathologist and her medical oncologist. So here we are. She sent multiple messages to her care team, trying to fill the gaps in, searching for reassurance. Eventually, she did have the chance to meet with her pathologist. I wasn't present with her and review her digitized slides. But by that point, she was already far down the road. She was armed with questions, yes, but also carrying weeks of unnecessary anxiety and uncertainty. And what struck me most was this. If she had been able to sit down with her pathologist from the very beginning, if someone had simply shown her images and explained what they meant in context of her own body, it would have changed everything. It would have grounded her understanding earlier, reduced her fear, and likely prevented so much of the back and forth through the messaging in the portal that followed. That experience reinforced to me that patients are already seeking answers where they can, like you mentioned. But nothing replaces a direct, image-based conversation with the expert who made the diagnosis. That's where clarity lives and where peace of mind can begin.
Mm-hmm. And I think it shows the gap, and there is the solution that you were working on. So the gap that I see here, okay, you have a patient who wants to know, who tries to find out. And of course, the information comes in the portal. So there is where you communicate. Who does this communication even go to? Like administrative person, some inbox, like, I don't know. Sometimes they answer me through my portal, sometimes they don't. But basically, there is no like established infrastructure, established clear path on the caregiver side to actually be responsive to these things. And, you know, everybody is busy. There is a million patients with different conditions, right? So if there is a thing that the caregivers don't know what to do with, they probably do nothing with it, like in this case. And then the patient has to like bang on this door and until they get annoying enough that somebody figures out a way. And by that point, like you said, the treatment probably began, the anxiety keeps piling up, the patient is probably labeled as somebody that is super inconvenient and difficult. How about being proactive about it, right? Especially after the research that you cited about over 80% of all the care team, let's call them care team group, wants to do that. And what I want to mention here is the pathology clinics, where patients can book time with a pathologist. And you've worked with colleagues like Dr. Ligia Joseph and others on this idea. And for someone who has never heard of that, what does a typical visit look like from the moment a patient walks in to the moment they leave in a pathology clinic? What is a pathology clinic?
Well, you're absolutely right. Most people think that pathology happens in a black box, behind the scenes, far away from patients. But what happens when that hidden specialty becomes a face-to-face conversation where patients can actually see their disease, ask questions in real time, and finally understand their diagnosis? This is a powerful question because it helps demystify something that sounds far more complicated than it is. At Michigan Medicine, The PFAC most recently asked a simple question. If patients are craving connection and clarity, why are pathologists so hidden? And that led to something really bold, the creation of a breast pathology clinic inside the cancer center, where patients can directly meet with a pathologist. Michigan said yes. The clinic launched in 2023 at Michigan Medicine for breast cancer patients, led by Dr. Ruba Ali-Femi, Director of Breast Pathology there, and in collaboration with Dr. Mustafa Yusuf, who leads the informatics and digital pathology team at Michigan and is also a breast pathologist. They made it successful. It wasn't built for patients, it was built with patients from the ground up. So what does a typical visit actually look like? Well, before the visit begins, the pathologist is preparing in a very intentional way. That includes a thorough review of the pathology report, clinical history, imaging context, and all digital slides. The pathologist is not just reviewing for accuracy, but thinking ahead about how to translate complex findings into language and visuals the patient can actually understand. In some cases, a lab or specimen tour may even be offered if the patient is interested in seeing more of the diagnostic process. At the same time, the environment is intentionally set up as private, HIPAA-compliant, calm space to ensure the patient feels safe and comfortable. When the patient arrives or logs in virtually, the visits begin with a warm introduction and a clear role setting. Identity is confirmed, and if family members are present or trainees are present, the patient is always asked who they would like to be included in the discussion. That small step reinforces control, consent, and trust. The pathologist then establishes rapport and sets expectations very explicitly. The purpose of this visit is to explain as a dedicated time to review the pathology report, slides, digital images, answer questions, and build understanding. Patients are reassured that this is a conversation, not a lecture, and that they can pause at any time. The visit typically begins with open-ended questions. For instance, what is your understanding of your disease so far? What would you like to focus on today? And this allows the pathologist to meet the patient exactly where they are, rather than assuming a starting point. From there, the explanation of the pathology report begins. The pathologist uses plain, non-technical language and often starts by showing normal tissue before moving to the abnormal tissue. Digitized slides are so useful, and they're intentionally used to make the diagnosis visible and concrete, turning what is often abstract information into something that the patient can actually see. Through the entire visit, the pathologist intentionally slows the pace. Information is delivered in small, digestible segments with frequent pauses to check for understanding. Questions like, does this make sense so far? What questions are coming up for you here? Are built into the flow, not saved for the end. Emotional responses are actively recognized as part of the clinic encounter. If a patient becomes quiet, overwhelmed, or distressed, the pathologist does not push forward. Instead, emotions are acknowledged directly. Statements such as, this is a lot to take in, or I can see how difficult this is for you, are used to create space for processing. And a key part of the visit is balancing information with empathy. The pathologist may gently prepare patients for difficult information that he or she is about to share, offering sort of a warning shot. For example, there are some findings I want to go through carefully with you now. Or, this may not be what we had hoped for. This approach helps reduce shock and preserves trust. Once the diagnosis has been explained, the pathologist summarizes the findings in clear, structured language and connects them to what happens next in the broader care pathway. The scope is reinforced. The pathologist is not deciding treatment, but ensuring the patient fully understands how the diagnosis was made and what it means. Before the visit ends, patients leave with concrete takeaways, a written summary, and potentially trusted educational resources they can follow up on, and a clear understanding for follow-up questions through their care team or the patient portal. After the visit, the encounter is documented in the electronic health record, so the oncologist and broader care team can build on the same understanding through a visit note. Coordination and continuity are central to the model. There is also a reflective component built into this work. Pathologists are encouraged to seek feedback, consider the patient experience surveys, and continuously refine how they communicate, because the goal is not just accuracy, but clarity and connection. And importantly, the work expanded beyond individual institutions. As I will note now, it has expanded beyond just Michigan to something larger. As you mentioned, together with Dr. Legia Joseph and a group of like-minded pathologists from across the country, many of whom were already actively running pathology clinics, and with me as the sole patient advocate in the group, we co-developed a national ASCP certification workshop on pathology clinics. Legia and I originally pitched the idea to the ASCP, and they immediately moved forward, funded the project, assembled a national team of experts, many of which Legia and I had identified. And we began to write a how-to guide for the field. It took about 1.5 years to write that full manuscript. And then the ASCP built the workshop certification program. This program is built from people actually doing the work. It covers everything from making the case to the C-suite, to billing and sustainability, to the full structure of how to conduct the patient encounter itself. It's a comprehensive, practical framework designed to make pathology clinics reproducible and scalable. I want pathology to move from the doctor's doctor to truly becoming the patient's doctor. And we're making real progress, because what often scares patients when they read their pathology report isn't so much the word cancer, it's the silence. This program equips pathologists to break that silence. And honestly, it's one of the things I am most proud of. And the ASCP should be proud as well, because no other major pathology organization, not CAP or USCAP, currently offers a certification workshop for pathology clinics. I truly believe that this work can move the entire field forward in patient care. It turns traditionally hidden specialty into direct, human, visual conversations where patients can finally see their diagnosis. And for many patients, that moment when the invisible becomes visible and the unknown finally makes sense, it's a moment where fear begins to turn into understanding, and understanding begins to turn into trust.
Mm-hmm. I am amazed how granular the guidance is in this, and how patient-centric, not only regarding the information, but also regarding the whole patient experience in this clinic. And I love that there is now an official way for pathologists to do that, because even before the survey, before this work, there have been several pathologists that started doing this work on social media, basically looking at cases, looking at slides, explaining what's there, but because there was no other way, right? There was no official or an hospital approved way to actually bring the patient and tell them, hey, this is what you're dealing with. And the gap between actually being with your diagnosing physician in the room and for them having this guide, okay, this is how I talk to patient, this is how I talk or don't talk about care because maybe another physician is going to talk about care is so big in comparison to, okay, you Google and you find a YouTube video and you look at something that has the same name as what you have on your report. But other than that, okay, you can see from the histopathology standpoint how your cells look like, right? So this is a huge closing the gap. And speaking of reports, many trailblazers, many patients, listeners may not know that laws like the 21st Century Cures Act and open notes rules change access to medical information. So in plain language, what rights do patients have today to their pathology reports, slides, and digital images? And obviously, I'm the most interested in digital images. And what does that mean in practice if they want to see their images? Like tying back to what you said about your friend that like had to bang on this door so much, like, is there a way to not have to do that? Is there an easier way?
Well, first, let me tackle the Cures Act law, which I think you're referring to. And this is something I feel so strongly about. I actually wrote an article for the pathologists entitled...
By the way, I want to give a shout out to the pathologists because this is how we met as well. Yes. I read your article. You read my article because I was recently interviewed about like my platform, my podcast and everything. And this is how we came in touch. So here a shout out to the pathologists. If you have not read any articles, we're going to put some in the show notes.
Yes, they are fantastic. I think of it as like a partner now because they are just open to all kinds of articles and ideas. So the editor that I work most often with is Helen Bistro, and she's been fantastic. Shout out to Helen. But yeah, so I wrote an article about the Cures Act. It was called The Best Kept Secret. I also made a video. And also I wrote the chapter on the Cures Act, which is part of that ASCP certification workshop that I mentioned, because they felt like I was sort of the expert on it. I did a deep dive on the act and all of the reports to Congress and so on and so forth. So what is it? The 21st Century Cures Act was signed into law actually back in 2016, but it was significantly updated December 2020. Its primary purpose with the update is to make health data accessible to patients through electronic formats, smartphones, patient portals, and the like. And embedded in that adjustment in 2020, deep within it is the requirement to release clinical data, test results, pathology reports, visit notes in near real time. And that means everything from your lab tests, imaging, and pathology reports, they must be made available electronically and free of charge. The law is on your side. I want everybody to know that. And according to the ONC report to Congress, this is only the beginning. Patient access to electronic health information is on a continuum, and the trend will grow and already has since 2020. What does it look like in real terms? So you may see your results posted on your portal within minutes of a pathologist signing the report. Sometimes or many times before your doctor has even had a chance to call you. And you no longer have to submit for a formal request to medical records and wait weeks. I found this interesting. There was a study of 8,000 patients at 4 health institutions. And what they found was that 95.7% want to continue to receive the immediate release of their results, even if it meant seeing them before the provider. And that percentage held at 95.3%, just slightly lower, when patients were asked if it showed abnormal results. They still wanted to see it. Patients want access, that's clear. But that same study found patients with abnormal results were almost twice as likely to experience anxiety, of course. And 57% of them went searching online for answers. And Dr. Seitz from the study found that patients actually expected contact from their care team within 6 hours of seeing an abnormal result. That's a bar that's very difficult to consistently meet. I saw this law work firsthand when my husband Bill ended up in the ER during a very busy time. And after hours of waiting on test results before he could be released, I went out and checked his portal and found that all his results were already there, and that what he was suffering from was a kidney stone. So I went out to the nurse's station and I told her, hey, the reports are already out there. Can the doctor release them? And I mentioned the Cures Act, and she had no idea what I was talking about. And she said, no, they're still waiting. And I showed her the portal, and I showed her the test results. So one conversation, one smartphone in the law, he was released. But I've also lived the other side. When a genetic test for a family member was posted to the portal before the neurologist could reach us, I turned to ChatGPT to make sense of what we were reading, and what came back was just as confusing and anxiety-producing as the report itself. So this is a cautionary tale. AI tools are everywhere, and patients are using them to fill the gaps, but AI can generate hallucinations. We've all heard about that. And it can look authoritative, but not be accurate. It cannot read your face. It cannot recognize your fear or know what matters most to you. When the Cures Act on blocking rule was first implemented in 2021, some practices responded with anxiety. Others rose to the opportunity. Some institutions added disclaimers or links to reliable resources. And those are steps in the right direction, but they remain uncommon and not enough on their own. This is exactly why pathology clinic model matters. When a report arrives in a portal, before anyone calls, there's no one to explain what the words mean. The pathology clinic fills that gap. And the Cures Act gets information into the patient's hands, but the pathology clinic helps them understand what it means. As a pathologist that I've come to know and really like, her name is Ann Buckley at Duke. She's a neuropathologist. She put it this way: we cannot leave patients stranded in front of a screen with no one to explain what they're reading. And you know what? Nearly half of Americans feel the healthcare system isn't compassionate. And studies show physicians miss 60 to 90% of opportunities to respond with compassion. Even as research links compassionate care to better outcomes. So the Cures Act creates the opportunity. Pathologists must step into it, not just as diagnosticians, but as human beings who understand what it means to receive difficult news alone. And for your listeners, you have more rights than you realize. Start by asking. If you look at your results, try not to do it somewhere safe with someone beside you, because information is power, but context is everything.
Very much, very much. And before you mentioned that the pathology clinics are, or the program, and they are run in a way to meet the patients where they are. So, the first thought is like, okay, a patient who does not have medical background, then you're going to be explaining it in a certain way. You're going to be looking for, signs of overwhelm. But then you have the other extreme. And before the episode, we mentioned, okay, several pathologists who are also patients. That's a different type of patients that you need to meet where they are, because they're going to have equally bad, non-compassionate experience if you start meeting them, talking to them in a patronizing way, or basically not meeting them where they are. So that is the skill that the doctor, the pathologist needs to have as well. Like you said, it's not supposed to be a lecture. It's supposed to be a conversation. You're going to have a different conversation with somebody with a law background than with a medical or healthcare background, right? And I experienced that in a not fantastic way when I had a brief period of, I'm not going to say taking care of my mom, because the medical team was taking care of her. She was in a coma, but I wanted to know. a lot of things. I would go to the literature. I'm a PhD scientist, veterinary pathologist, right? So at some point I received a phone call that all these questions are very much annoying the care team, and what am I trying to interfere with treatment? And they basically told me to shut up. So I was very much not met where I was. That was my not fantastic experience with the other side of the spectrum. So that's why I think this phrase, meeting the patient where they are, is super important. Going back more to the practical side of things, when the trailblazer who had a biopsy is ready to ask for their images but feels intimidated, because that is often the feeling that you have when you go to the doctor's office. Like you cited, 60% of patients think that there is not enough compassion in the healthcare system, right? So obviously you come and you often feel intimidated. What simple, respectful wording do you recommend to use, whether they're talking to pathology, medical records, their oncologists, so they can say, I want to see my slides in a way that works and doesn't require them to I'm going to keep using the analogy of banging at the door that doesn't want to open.
Well, Alek, I love this question because it gets to something real. And many patients know they want something, but they don't know how to ask without feeling like they're being difficult. I want to tell every patient out there, you're not being difficult. You are advocating for yourself. And that is your right. Here's language that tends to work. To your oncologist or treating physician, how about something like, I'd like to better understand my pathology. Is there a way I could meet with my pathologist to review my slides? That framing, better understanding, is non-threatening and collaborative. It invites your doctor into the conversation rather than around it. And to the pathology department directly, I'm a patient in your system and I'm interested in scheduling a pathology clinic visit if your department offers that to review my slides with the pathologist. I'd like to meet with you to get an understanding of the findings in my pathology report and any associated digital image. Referencing your rights matters. It signals that you know the law supports you. You don't have to be aggressive about it. Simply naming your rights calmly and clearly often changes the dynamic entirely. And one thing I'd like to add is that if you're someone who finds it hard to look at test results when they come in, that is completely valid. Reviewing your information is not for everyone. If you choose to look, try to do it in a calm moment, read it, absorb it, take a breath, write down questions, and come back to it. You might also ask your ordering physician ahead of time, for how soon do you expect to get the results and when will they be made available and when could I expect to hear from you? And that's one question maybe can save someone a great deal of anxiety.
Yes.
And
I think...
go ahead. I think you were also talking about, patients may not understand it. The pathologists don't have time.
Yes, because that's the pushback that I see mostly, in LinkedIn comments whenever I try to approach the subjects, that patients won't understand, pathologists don't have time, that this is not reimbursed. That's another one, that the patient is going to be overwhelmed. So what would you say to both the patients who are afraid to look, like you mentioned, and the pathologists who are afraid to open the door to these conversations?
Well, I too have heard every version of the resistance on both sides, and I understand it. Let me speak to each. To the patients who are afraid to look, I hear you. Fear of what you might see is real, but I want to offer you a different frame. What I found and what I hear from patients again is that seeing is less frightening than not knowing. The unknown feeds anxiety, and clarity, even when it's hard, gives you something to work with. You don't have to look alone. A pathology clinic happens with a physician in a room where the entire purpose is to guide you, explain what you're seeing, and answer your questions. And you set the pace. These conversations are patient-led. If you get pushback when requesting slides or a clinic visit, stay calm, stay curious, stay professional. Ask, can you help me understand what the process is? Most of the time, resistance comes from unfamiliarity with the request. They just don't get them, not from an intent to block you. And to the pathologists who are hesitant, I deeply respect the weight of your work. I know that time is scarce. Reimbursement is complicated, and you worry about causing distress. But here's what I've learned from years of sitting at the table with pathologists. Most pathologists behind those microscopes don't know much about the patients they serve. And most patients behind that slide don't know how critical pathologists are in their cancer journey. When a pathologist takes the time to meet with the patient does not leave overwhelmed, they feel empowered. Patients know they want something, they just don't know how to ask, but it's your right. People respond well when they feel like a partner rather than a gatekeeper. And if you need support, bring someone with you. You don't have to do this alone. You have another set of ears, someone who can help you remember what was said and how to follow up. And for the pathologists, the practical how-to, time scheduling, documentation, and billing. Now, I know for pathologists, these questions, they follow every conversation I've ever had. How do I find the time? How does it get scheduled? How do I document it? And critically, how does it get reimbursed? And I want to address these directly because the answers already exist. Other pathologists are already doing this work and they've figured it out. Time. The most common concern I hear from pathologists is,
there are trailblazers there.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I just said that there are already trailblazers that we can follow.
Yes. So time. The most common concern I hear from pathologists is I simply don't have the time. Well, here's what pioneers of this movement have found in practice. Most pathology clinic visits run about 30 minutes. That is the standard encounter length used by pathologists currently conducting these clinics. Virtual pathology clinics are a game changer for time efficiency.
I know.
During the pandemic, the country pivoted to telehealth almost overnight. A virtual patient pathology consultation can be conducted without leaving the lab, without parking logistics, and often offer greater flexibility for both parties. Maybe your patient is sick. They don't want to ride into the facility. This allows them to review their slides with family members in the comfort of their home. It just makes sense and is a time saver. Residents and fellows can assist with the initial consultation. One model that has been explored involves a resident or fellow conducting the first part of the visit with a predetermined sort of script to gauge the patient's understanding and goals. Then the attending pathologist can join for any additional questions. The resident or fellow can prepare the note in the EHR, which saves the attending time. Here's a real novel tool, again, within the pathologist. It was an article I read about pathology messaging pool. It's another creative way for managing time. So what this was, 3 pathologists got together and they rotated, took turns answering questions. I believe they were sent through the patient portal. And the pool is monitored by, I think, up to 5 pathologists on a weekly rotation. Pathologists who have implemented this have said it is not adding significant burden, and patient response has been overwhelmingly positive. Here's another idea. Some institutions are exploring pathology navigator model, a designated role within the pathology department to interface with patients and coordinate the care, which frees up other department resources and allows interested pathologists to opt out without redefining their traditional role for everyone. Okay, scheduling. The scheduling process has been mapped out clearly by those already running successful clinics. Here's what happens. A referring provider, the treating physician, some other clinician, can place an order or referral to initiate the appointment, sometimes referred to as an REF 532 ambulatory referral to pathology for review with a patient. Boy, that was a long one. But it's being used at institutions. Alternatively, the patient can contact the pathology department's administrative staff to directly schedule the appointment. And then scheduling, including cancellations and rescheduling, is managed by the administrative staff. The appointment should be held in a secure and confidential space, as I mentioned earlier, if it's being done on site, with a microscope and a screen to display the digitized slides. If possible, it would be great if the check-in area would be located near where the referring clinic is. Then automation has already happened through Epic and MyChart. It's already a reality at many institutions, including where Legia works at Tufts Medical Center. It's a streamlined workflow developed in collaboration with Epic developers. So what happens there is the administrative staff or the pathologist can schedule the appointment with just a few clicks. They select the patient, they pick the appropriate pathologist from a pathology resource list, and the system auto-generates the scheduling and pre-populates a template. It's a note. In the future, as patient care teams expand within the portals, patients may be able to self-schedule through MyChart, choosing directly from the pathologist named in their report. The patient receives instructions on where to park and navigate, and so on and so forth. On the day of the appointment, any applicable copay, which is collected at the front desk. Documentation, and this is key. Documentation does not have to be a burden. At Tufts, they've streamlined this whole process. Within Epic, a sample note, which they call a smart note, was developed with boilerplate in it. It's pre-built for the pathologist. The pathologist opens the patient chart, inserts into the smart note, and customize all the wildcard text that's in there. That creates the appropriate pathology consult note required for billing. Once the visit is complete, then the pathologist inputs the appropriate diagnosis, determines the level of service, whether it was a half hour, 45 minutes, selects the appropriate CPT code using a click of a button, and signs the note. The documentation of billing is already done. Following the encounter, a note should be sent to the referring physician, and a follow-up survey, as I mentioned, should be provided. If residents or fellows have assisted, they can prepare the note in the EHR summarizing what went on. Now, the big one, billing and reimbursement. Reimbursement is one of the most common concerns I hear. And the good news is there is clear billing structure. It already exists. It's already